Welcome to the On Assignment Podcast. I am John Harvey. My co-host Will Derlick is actually out on assignment today, but I am completely honored and excited to have a very special guest with us today. And that guest is my beautiful wife, Brenda Harvey. Brenda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Well, I am excited and honored to be here. This is actually my first podcast, so it's an honor to have this be the first one I've ever done.
Yeah, I'm excited too about it. It was great. We were talking about what we wanted to discuss today on the podcast, and it was like, it just makes sense to have you on here with me because of the topic that we're going to cover today. And what we see often in the lives of men around us is a difficulty that they can have in their marriages, being men who understand how to build intimacy into their relationship with their wife. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because it's a crucial subject for marriages.
Yes.
It's absolutely something to where we know that our enemy, the devil, is out there trying to ruin family and destroy marriages. He does that by destroying marriages.
Yep.
And one of the ways that a marriage can be destroyed is if it never, ever develops intimacy. If a man and his wife never develop intimacy, that marriage will not be healthy.
No.
It will not grow, and it may last, but it won't be a life-giving, fulfilling relationship. And so we're going to talk about that today, because it's important for us to build intimacy into our marriage, but it's also something that God desires. God wants us to have intimacy as man and wife. In Genesis chapter 2, one of the very first things that God initiates in the relationship between Adam and Eve is this thing of covenant, of marriage, where he says a man is to leave his father and mother, and he's to join with his wife. And it says that the two shall become one.
That's right.
And that process of becoming one is a process of becoming close.
Yes.
Of becoming actually closer than anything else as a husband and wife. And that's called intimacy. And, a lot of times I look at intimacy as being something that is where you're getting very close, but it's also where you're getting deeper and you're becoming more profoundly knowledgeable about each other.
That's
and
right.
it's such a tremendously important topic to cover, but it's also something to where, man, I feel like that I really didn't know about intimacy when we first got married. So we've been married 32 years this year, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so how was I as a young husband when it comes to intimacy?
Well, I would have to say it's something that you definitely grew in. And, I was more of the emotional, being emotional, intelligent, connected. And so you had to learn that more about yourself and about me. And, those early days when you're the wife that's like, breaking down emotionally, and you're like, what is going on with this woman? You're discovering each other and the differences and the blending. Like you had said, the two become one. Well, there's a blending of two people from two different backgrounds, two different personalities, how your family dealt with issues and things, and that you're trying to come together to be one and share intimacy, share hearts, share emotions. And so that, I think that you have grown immensely in that area, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
And I think too, having children expands you as well. And so when we started having children, the emotional intelligence and getting in touch with your emotions was there as well.
Yeah. And there's a lot, so much of that is important to developing intimacy. And it's something that, I look back, I had a great family growing up. My parents are awesome. But one thing that we never talked about, one thing that I never even knew about, was this thing called intimacy. About the only thing I knew about intimacy was its relationship to intimate, which was basically a section at JCPenney's where all the women's kind of intimate apparel was at. And, but that was about the extent of my knowledge of intimacy. And so when you're dating and you're young and you're pursuing a woman for a relationship with her. Basically, it's like this Romeo Juliet thing where you're like,
Mhm.
man, if I can woo her enough
Mhm.
and I can impress her enough and I can really try and come at the right angles in this relationship, I might be able to win her heart. But it's actually, for me, it was not something to where I came at it with this desire to really know who you were or to understand how you felt,
Mhm.
because that was just foreign to me. I didn't even think of those types of things. And so when you
Mhm.
talk about emotional intelligence, I honestly don't think I even heard that term emotional intelligence until I was probably and I hate to say this, but I was probably in my early 40s, my mid 40s,
Mhm.
before I even really understood what emotional intelligence was. I may have started to develop in that area before I knew what it was, but man, emotional intelligence is incredibly important when it comes to intimacy. And so we're gonna just talk about 6 areas where a man and his wife can develop intimacy, what what that area really specifically encompasses, and then what's a practical thing that you can do to actually help build that. And you might be listening and today and saying, well, I'm not even married, so this isn't a topic for me. Or maybe you've experienced a breakup or a divorce and you're not in a relationship right now. Well, you know that's probably okay, but it's like, if you want to listen in and learn about these things, it will help you when you do get into a relationship, when you do begin to pursue a woman's heart. And so these are some things that are really important, and some things that, to be completely honest, the majority of our marriage I didn't know about, and I wished
Mhm.
I had. And so if there's any way for me to be able to begin to communicate to you younger guys some of these things that will help
Mhm.
you in your marriage starting out earlier, it's going to be incredible at what it does to help your marriage get stronger, go deeper, become more fulfilling, and where your relationship with your wife gets healthier and stronger. And so these are 6 areas where you can build intimacy in your marriage with your wife that maybe you didn't know about. All right. And so we're going to
Yes.
start with area number 1 is emotional intimacy. So what
Yes.
is emotional intimacy?
Emotional intimacy is a place where you're sharing hearts, feelings, frustrations, hurts, but that you are actually allowing yourself to be vulnerable to share those things, knowing that you're not going to be rejected, but that you're going to be heard. And I think that we had to learn that process of hearing each other out and understanding each other,
Yeah.
because I know that we're different. God made us both very different, and I think those differences actually are powerful.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, though, that the enemy used that to come in to try to divide our emotional intimacy by, like, partnering with a lie for me that was like, oh, we're so opposite and different.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think he'll ever understand me. I don't know if I can be emotional with him because he's not as emotional as I am. And so that was a lie that, I had to recognize and go, no, actually. And I remember there was a preacher that actually just said to us, like, you guys are like a double barreled shotgun
Right.
and you're powerful together.
Mm.
And that was like a truth bomb. Like, you know what? We're actually powerful together. And the enemy would want to divide our emotional intimacy and be like, you're different. You do things different. You don't think the same way. But actually, we're powerful together. And that, we're able to, you know, strive and fight for connection, even though we're different. And we had to do that in our marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting trying to connect with a woman emotionally in the context of marriage, when I was raised in an environment that said that demonstrations of emotion were discouraged. If you showed your emotion, it was kind of like you were being weak, or you weren't having good self-control.
Mm.
And so there was, not that it was, again, my parents were great, but there was in that time frame or that era, there was almost a sense of you need to bottle up all your emotions and not let those things be on display publicly. Otherwise, you'll be looked at as being weak and not having any self-control. And so what I learned as a kid was that, oh, I'm better off and I'm actually in good standings with adults when I bottle up my emotions. And so for me, it was like, oh, that's easy. I never have to be sad. I never have to be have this big outburst of anger. I can control my emotions by bottling them up, but yet I never learned to handle them. It's like trying to get good at using a tool without ever taking the tool out and using it. I did not learn how to handle my emotions. And I was just completely unaware. I figured that when we first got married, that if I treated you kindly, if I worked hard, brought home a paycheck, and, just was nice to you, that was basically what emotional intimacy was about. But it was so far from the truth, because what would happen is if there was a point in time where there was a conflict, dealing with conflict was like, I felt like I couldn't deal with the conflict with any type of emotion. So it was like, when you bottle your emotions up, basically you create a lid in your soul, a cap, where it's like, you're not going to get angry, or you're not going to experience grief or sadness, because you're going to shut it off. You're going to bottle it up. Well, when you do that, you also bottle up all the good stuff as well. The joy and the different emotions that you feel. And so later on in life, I learned that if I could learn to grieve and I could learn to control my anger, that it would raise the lid of my capacity in my soul, to where I could experience even greater joy. But early on, it wasn't that way. And so we'd have a conflict, and it was like, I would either be angry and strong, or I would bottle up and say nothing.
Right. And disconnect.
Yes. Disconnection. Oh my goodness. And see, disconnection is actually the exact opposite of intimacy.
That's right.
Wow. Yeah. And the devil uses disconnection to create so much division, to bring a wedge.
Right.
And you think you're protecting your spouse because you're like, I'm not going to hurt her with my emotions.
Right.
But yet you're not diving into a healthy emotional exchange that allows there to be emotional intimacy. You're disconnecting and actually bringing more separation.
That is correct. And then it feels very much like you're on the opposite side of the room and I'm over here, and there's this big divide.
Yeah.
And, what I love, though, is that it is something, though, that you have developed over the years. And it is something that a man can develop.
Yes.
So there's hope in there. And that you actually can have an extremely beautiful emotional connection with your wife. And you've done that.
Yeah.
You put in the time to actually recognize your own emotions and realize, I can't disconnect from those. I actually need to feel these things, and I need to express these things.
Yeah.
And that's when we begin to share, some of those emotional things. That connectedness has led to such a sweet, sweet relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that part of that process for me was actually learning to identify what I was feeling. Because I had bottled up emotions for so long, they kind of all got jumbled together in this mix. And I was like, I don't know if I'm angry, frustrated, sad, confused. What am I feeling right now? And a lot of times when I was in the darkness of depression, it was really bad. You'd be like, what's going on? What's the matter? And I'd be like, I don't know. Literally, like, honestly, I don't know what I'm feeling or what I'm going through. And when you don't know, you're in this dark place. You don't know how to counteract it. You don't know how to respond. And so a lot of that emotional intelligence came by me beginning to actually pay attention to my emotions.
Yes.
Which was something that was so like
foreign.
Yeah. It's like, men don't pay attention to their emotions. We just kind of grind our way through it and just kind of plow our way forward, and we're not going to stop and worry about how we feel. That's
Mhm.
weakness. But when that is bringing disconnection between you and your wife and it's actually damaging your relationship, you realize the value. Okay, I've got to learn and grow in this area. So beginning to identify how you're feeling and what that emotion is
Mhm.
important.
It is. And I think to add to that is that I saw that you wanted to go to your comfortable place because you're such a hard worker. So what you would want to do is I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to throw myself into work. So you would go like, I'm going to go outside and mow the lawn and just, so there was also throwing yourself, I'm just going to work so this will just subside.
Yeah.
And so recognizing those signs.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like, go work on a project, go to the gym, go play some basketball, whatever I could do physically to get out there, go hiking, literally
Right.
anything physical, because that's what I understood. And that's where I felt comfortable. And that's where I felt confident. But that would just be a means of me avoiding this need to come to a place of emotional interaction with you. And so therefore there was this emotional divide that needed to be bridged.
Yes.
And so if you're feeling that way as a listener, you're like, man, I feel like that my wife and I don't have this emotional intimacy, that we don't understand each other emotionally. Understand that that's something that you build over time. It's not like you can just flip a switch and all of a sudden you're emotionally engaged and you've reached this point of emotional intimacy, but it's a journey that you just begin. And what's amazing though is that when you begin that journey of stepping into emotional intimacy, it's like a whole new level in your relationship. And so what I would recommend is you beginning to, first of all, identify how you're feeling and then learning to communicate that to your spouse. And instead of being upset with how they're feeling or being, allowing their feelings to interfere with your feelings, you identify your feelings and then you learn to communicate it to them without pointing the finger at them or blaming them. It's like, man, I feel like right now that I feel really angry right now, or I feel really sad right now, or I'm really upset. And this is why. And allowing them to hear how you're feeling, because that's part of you sharing.
That's right.
And then you're actually beginning to walk with each other through the emotions that you're sharing and that you're feeling.
That's right. And I think it's also that level of not being, as you're learning how to share emotions, that it's not out of frustration, because that won't really accomplish. So it's that just like how you were talking, it's this is what I'm feeling, this, because when you end up communicating emotions out of a place of the anger rises up and that doesn't accomplish anything.
Right. Yeah.
On both ends.
Right.
And so learning how to communicate and calmly like this, and maybe that for you is letting some time pass, a few hours, let me calm down, let me gather my thoughts. Let's come and revisit this conversation.
Right.
Because I really want you to know how I'm feeling. And it's important that we talk through this.
Yeah. And so for me, that was the one thing I dreaded. It was like, oh my gosh, we've got to actually sit and have a conversation about this. And so on a guy's part, if he doesn't want to do that, you've got to actually be willing to sacrifice and say, okay, I've got to step into something that's uncomfortable for me. And you've got to make the time to have that conversation. Now, for both parties in the marriage, something important to understand is that timing is important.
That's right.
And so if your wife has been at home all day and has had a hectic day with the kids and just things have not gone well for her at home, and you get home and all of a sudden you want to step into a conversation with her about how she's feeling, it might not be the best time.
Right.
Or if a guy's laying in bed and he's half asleep and the wife decides, hey, now's a great time to talk because it's just the two of us, it's like probably not the best time to start a conversation when a guy's half asleep.
No, I've done that, but to you before.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, they're snoring. Oh, You're asleep? How long have you been asleep?
Yeah, right.
I
Yeah.
learned like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
that's not the best time.
Right. And so being able to communicate that in an environment where it's like, I understand that if I say this, I'm not going to hurt your feelings, or that you trust this environment we've created. It's like, you know what? Now is not the best time. Why don't we, grab dinner, get the kids put down, and then take some time this evening and we'll just talk.
That's right.
Or you know what? This weekend, whatever it is, don't push it off too far, but being able to just plan a timeout and say, all right, this is when we're going to do that, so that you're both on the same page, but being willing to do it, and then understanding that timing is important.
That's right.
And so one of the things that you can do to, even today, to start building emotional intimacy with your wife is to pick a point in time where you're going to spend 10 minutes with her. There's going to be no phones, no TV, nothing except the two of you, and you guys just share 10 minutes together and ask about each other's day, and begin to say, how are you feeling? How did that go?
Yes.
And a lot of times that 10-minute window of time will actually extend into a longer time.
Yes.
But even if it doesn't, that's a length of time that even two really busy people can manage to carve out.
Absolutely. I know for me personally, I love it. The mornings that you're like, hey, can I make you breakfast? And then we'll spend time.
Yeah.
And we'll pray, or we'll just talk or catch up and have that emotional connection. We can do that at dinner. And then there's times on the property here, it's like, oh, when the weather's nice, where there's beautiful sunsets. And so trying to catch those, like, come, let's sit on the bench and watch the sunset. It's the little things. But it's important to make the time for those things.
Right. Yeah. I agree 100%. Anything you can do to build points of connection. It's huge. And so that's area number one, is that emotional intimacy. So really work to build that emotional connection with your spouse.
That's right.
The next area that we're going to talk about is the physical intimacy. All right. So physical intimacy is, this is different than the area we'll talk about later of sexual intimacy. This is physical intimacy. And this is basically the area where we connect through physical touch. All right. And some people are going to have more of a need for this than others. Some people are going to feel more comfortable doing this than others, but it's very important. And it's interesting, the dynamic that physical touch plays in a relationship and how important it is. And so the challenge is also is that a lot of times if you marry someone who has different needs for that,
right,
then lack of physical intimacy can create that disconnect and that division in your marriage, because one person who really wants physical touch is longing for it, and the other person's like, I don't ever long for it, but they don't even think to give it to the other person. And so there's a disparity on both ends, right? And so how would you say that we have developed that in our marriage as far as that physical intimacy?
I feel like because I value physical touch, that's probably higher on my list of what I need. And so I think that you have seen that, and so it's important to me, and you have made the effort to pursue me in that way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's being aware of each other's needs and how you both respond to love, the needs are, and that you're actually going, you know what, I actually want to lay my life down for this person and love them well.
Yeah.
And so in that, I'm willing to love them well in the areas that are their needs.
Yeah.
And so I'm just thankful that you paid attention and that you pursued me with the physical.
Right. Yeah, because it doesn't come naturally to everyone. And I think that everyone can engage in it and begin to build this obviously into their relationship. But it was something to where I had to become aware of that was something important to you. Again, because when you're pursuing someone during that dating or courting phase, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to, I want to be close to you in that timeline. But then you get married and then you get a couple years into the relationship and kind of the newness kind of wears off,
Start
and
having
you all of a
kids.
sudden you've got kids, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're just kind of, it just, life just gets so full, and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to find the time to actually have that type of physical intimacy built
Mm-hmm.
into your marriage. And so you you can actually forget about the need for it.
That's right.
And so building that into your understanding is important, that, okay, my wife or my husband, whoever, they need physical touch. And so, like, when
Mm-hmm.
we're driving together
Mm-hmm.
and you put your arm across the console and it's
Mm-hmm.
like you reach out, I'm like, I have to be aware of what you're doing, because you're giving me a signal that, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
want you to hold my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a trigger for me to respond. Okay, good. And I found myself to where there's times where I'm deep in thought, I'm driving and your
Mm-hmm.
hand's over there, and then I won't even be aware of it. And then it's like, oh, wait a second. She's wanting me to hold her hand. So I'll hold your hand. Or,
Right.
she's wanting me to rub her shoulders, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's like these things that we do that create physical connection
Yeah.
are important. And they actually have, that physical connection actually has an emotional and psychological impact
Mm-hmm.
on our loved one, on our
Yes.
spouse. And so learning to develop that is really critical.
I think also that your kids need to see it. If you have children, they actually need to see that you guys have physical touch, and they need it. They
Yes.
need hugs. It's something that should be flowing in a family,
Yeah.
a healthy family, a connected family, an emotionally connected family. And so I do feel like you're also setting an example for your children.
Yeah. And that window of time that you've got your kids at home, where they're actually at an age where you can hold their hand or put them on your shoulders or hug
Mm-hmm.
them or give them a kiss, it goes by so quickly. And so you want to
Mm-hmm.
take advantage of every opportunity to do that with them.
That's right. Do you remember the time when our son, he would hold your hand,
Yeah.
and then there was a moment where it was like he still wanted to hold your hand, but then he reached an age, and then he was like, "Oh, I think I'm." You
Well,
remember that?
yeah, he actually he likes physical
Physical,
touch for
yeah.
sure, but he was holding my hand at one point, and I thought, well, man, I think he's too old to hold my hand.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I was like, but then I was like, well, I'm not going to stop him
Right.
because it's not going to last forever. And
Mm-hmm.
I loved that when we had that connection,
Mm-hmm.
and just wrestling with the kids was another means of
Mm-hmm.
physical connection with them.
That's right.
And so with our kids and our marriages, we've got to be free as men to kind of lay down lay down our pride and this macho image, and allow ourselves to be undignified,
Mm-hmm.
and hold our wives' hands, give our wives hugs and kisses in public, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to wrestle with our kids and get down on our knees with our
Mm-hmm.
nephews and nieces, and to be silly, and
Mm-hmm.
those types of things are so engaging, and there's such a deep connection. And so if you're looking at your marriage and you're like, man, I don't feel like we've got very good physical intimacy. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
touched my wife in a long time. She hasn't
Mm-hmm.
touched me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? That's something that you can start with, and it will open the doors to other areas of growth in your marriage.
That's right.
Why don't you take a walk and hold your wife's hand? Or
Yes.
why don't you, if you're watching a show on TV, sidle up next to her, put your
Mm-hmm.
arm around her, and watch the
Mm-hmm.
show together with your arm around her. Begin to reintegrate that physical connection
Mm-hmm.
with your spouse. It's actually one of the easiest ways to recreate connection and intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
You might feel like, well, I'm not very good with emotions. Well, okay, you can grow in the emotional area, just
That's
like we
right.
talked about. But if you begin to integrate physical touch, it's gonna come. You're gonna actually
Mm-hmm.
begin your spouse, whether it's your wife, or if a wife's listening and it's your husband, they're
Mm-hmm.
gonna know, okay, oh, they're really wanting to begin to engage at a different level with me, and
Mm-hmm.
this is the start of that.
That's right. And it's not for, sex.
Right.
It's actually just for connection.
Right.
And so,
Yeah, we're not talking about like this being like Rico Suave foreplay stuff. This is like you just
yeah, with
let
no other intention
yeah,
but to actually meet the need of the physical touch
yeah,
and be connected and be close.
That's really good. Yeah. So begin to build that into your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Begin to be aware of it and take advantage of opportunities to hold a hand, to hug, to rub shoulders, to, to cuddle, to embrace. Cuddle's kind of it's not a very masculine word, but but so there we have it. That's physical intimacy.
Right.
All right. And so that was number 2. Number 3 would be financial intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And financial intimacy is one in which we are connected with an important part of our marriage, which is our finances.
Right.
And if you look at elements that will tear a marriage apart or that will degrade a marriage, first of all, lack of intimacy as a whole is one of those things that really is hard on marriages. But if you look at financial pressure breaks a lot of marriages. And it's because they're trying to handle financial stress and pressure in a way where they're not connected, they're not intimate, and they're disconnected. And it just brings greater and greater division into their marriage.
That's right.
So what are some things that you can do to help with financial intimacy? What are some things that a couple can practice that would help them in that area?
I think it's being willing to talk about it. I know that when we would do it'd be like, okay, let's make our budget. And it'd be so like, oh, I don't know if we have, you'd go through the budget and go, oh, do we have anything left? It could be like this downer of an evening. And it was like, wow, I don't even know if I want to go there. So sometimes you just ignore it and you don't want to talk about finances. Yeah. It's like we're having time together and I don't even want to go over finances, but you need to. And I know that that's part of the connectedness, and to where you're not walking independently in the finances, and that, one person knows where we're at and the other person doesn't, to where you're both on the same page.
Yeah.
And that you can share in that with, the area of, let's plan a vacation. Let's save for that. Let's do that together.
Yes.
Let's set up a budget to where we could both have the goal of saving extra money for such and such trip. Or a purchase. And then also just setting up communication to where, if I'm going to spend a certain amount, that we're always going to consult each other, that you're not just going to come home and you bought a car off the lot and I had no input. I wasn't part of the decision, that we would honor each other in our finances and we would talk through some of those major purchases. And we always did that. I felt like that was, something important. Or if you would, go buy like something, like you're into bow hunting. So, you would always be like, I don't know about this purchase. What do you think? I want your input. And I always felt valued that you would include me in a big purchase.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some, just important things that you're willing to talk about it. And, just personally, I remember we went through a season where I hid something from you in our finances, because I was like, it was really tight. I didn't want to burden you with. And so I think I opened a credit card without asking you. And I remember it was hiding, but it was just so uncomfortable. And I just knew it was wrong. Because you don't want to hide things from each other. That's what divides the intimacy.
That's right.
In that finances, that divided the intimacy.
Yeah.
And so I remember coming to you because it was eating me up, and I confessed, I had done that, and you were very gracious, but I bring it to the light.
Yeah.
And so I think if there are areas that you're hiding things financially, it's good to bring them to the light and to actually talk about them, because that financial wedges in marriages it's real.
Yeah.
And it will divide you, and you want to come into agreement about things. And there's also an element that there's always a spender and a saver. Typically, there's two, and I would have to say I'm the spender and you're the saver. And so there's the element too of being willing to work together in the finances to meet each other halfway. Because I would do better if we went over the finances. You were like, you're the saver. And so it'd be like, I'm like, there's no room for anything. Life's over. I can't even get a coffee. And so I would do better, like meeting in the middle by being like, okay, like here's a cash. This is, some cash. Go ahead and use that. Cause we're, one income. We were making sacrifices, but we chose to do that.
Yeah.
And so, but meeting each other halfway.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. And this is an area where I see a lot of guys that want to hide these things from their wives. They're like, yeah, I went out and bought a gun, but my wife doesn't know. I'm just going to get her something nice so that it kind of balances things out. And it's kind of like, I'm going to go spend money secretively, but I'm going to sweeten it up by getting my wife something nice. And it's like, well, that's not that's not financial connection. That's not financial intimacy. It's not, it's really saying I'm worried about what my wife would say. And I think she'd probably disagree with this decision. And therefore I'm just going to do it and then try and sweeten it up. But ultimately that poisons the relationship.
That's right.
Because it doesn't build trust. And if there's no trust and there's not this connection, then the marriage cannot thrive. And then what you find is that where there's no trust, both parties are beginning to deceive each other.
That's right.
Because they're afraid of bringing things into the light,
That's
like
right.
you said. So financial intimacy. So begin to have conversations with your spouse about your spending, about where you're at financially. And, and if there's an agreement you make where it's like, hey, we don't have to both talk about finances every week, but let's get together once a month and just talk about like, hey, where are we at? Maybe one of you is more administrative and wants to take that role on just like making sure bills are paid and that type of thing. Great, do that. But make sure that it's not something to where you guys are keeping things hidden in the dark and that you're not consulting one another, but really begin to work towards coming together on your finances. I love the goals that you talked about, where it's like having some savings goals. What are we going to be doing this next year? Because that's intentionality. And I feel like all of these points of intimacy require intentionality, but financial intimacy requires a lot of intentionality because you never feel like doing it in the moment. You'd rather do anything else than talk about finances.
Right.
Typically. Right. So financial intimacy, that's an important one to build because financial pressure and division will wreck a marriage. All right. And we want people to be healthy in their marriages and enjoy themselves without the financial stress and division.
That's right.
So the next area we're going to talk about is spiritual intimacy.
Okay.
All right. This is where we come together in our faith, where we come together in our belief system, and we are actually building our faith together, where we're actually living out our spiritual life together. And this is another area, I tell you, this is another area where it's like, it's not been an easy road for us. People might think, oh, well, you guys are like, you guys are people of faith and you've been together so long. It didn't always like come easy at a spiritual level, because typically, especially when we were first married, I remember when we were first married, it was like the church we went to had multiple meetings a week. And I was kind of a Sunday morning meeting guy. And then I was kind of like, okay, I've checked that box and now I can do other things. And when we started dating and then when we first got married, you were like, well, aren't we going to church tonight? It's Sunday evening.
Right. I was used to that.
Yeah.
That was, I was so involved in young adults. And so that was my life. So it's again, that blending where then you're like, oh, you want to go again?
Well, yeah. And you it filled your cup with the social connections and seeing people.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm more like, man, I got to get up early and get to work in the morning. I don't want to be out till too late. I was kind of focused on Monday morning already and want just kind of relax a little bit and then get ready for the week. And really the last thing I wanted to do was go to a church service. And it was the same for like a midweek service too. So what ended up happening is that you would either end up kind of dragging me to a meeting and I would go just because I would feel like I was letting you down, or it became a point of contention and conflict at some levels. And we had to work our way through that. And then through the
Mhm.
years, though, we saw that as we were engaged in different assignments together and living our life on mission together,
Mhm.
that we began to come together more and more in this area and grow in our spiritual intimacy.
Right.
But what were some of the things that you think that helped get us through some of those challenges to where we were actually grew closer
Mhm.
in our faith?
Well, I do believe that when we met, maybe I'll just share that briefly. That I was hosting a party for young adults, and you came into town from Missouri, drove in, and went to the party, and we met each other. And we had a dear friend who he was such a prankster, but he shoved me into your lap, and we toppled to the floor, broke a chair, and you're just like, you got up like red, and I was so like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, and I was about ready to kill my friend, like what?
Right.
But we met at a young adult and began to go to church together, and you had that foundation in your life, so it was there. It wasn't, but we had to discover that when we got married. Then what does that look like? How often are we going to go?
Right.
What's the commitment going to be like?
Well, when we were dating and engaged, it was easy for me to want to go to church if
True.
you were going to be there.
Right.
Because it's like, oh, well, if Brenda's there, yeah, I'll go.
Right.
I sat through watching your friends' intramural basketball games because I knew you'd be there,
I
right?
know you pursued well, John
Yeah.
Harvey.
And so, but once you win the prize, it's like, oh, we still have to go to church on Sunday night. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it was
Right.
easier for me during the courting, dating phase than it was the newly married stage. But yeah, it wasn't that I didn't have faith. It wasn't that I didn't want God in my life, but I felt like it was just like I didn't need to go all these extra meetings.
Right.
And you wanted to go, and so it was a point of conflict.
Right. And that's where again we talked about meeting each other in the middle. So it was like I realized that I didn't want to be apart from you. So the Sunday night I was like, I'm willing to lay that down so that we actually can spend time together. So we met each other in the middle.
Yeah.
And we didn't compromise church. We didn't compromise our desire for the Lord. And but I realized like, oh, we're not on the same, track like
Yeah.
that. And so I think it was grace. It was having grace for each other, or I had grace for you. And not that you were wrong, but I had grace.
Right.
And then through that, though, I think it's something that we just began to develop. We always wanted to do ministry, and our lives have always been about ministering and others.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely a foundation that was laid in our lives. I think the spiritual intimacy was something that grew of just like, let's praying together, or growing in the sense of sharing spiritual things. Where are you at? Like what's God speaking to you? Um, and I think what's really neat is I can say through the years, because that was a foundation we built on, and it was something that was developed that we had to develop.
Right.
Because we're talking 32 years we've been at it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's been the highs and the lows, but it has been a basic foundation that we have built our lives on. And there's been moments where, I remember just a scenario that the Lord was stirring our hearts to move. And we were going to be relocating. We were part of a Hispanic church, and, our time was up, and God put it in. He literally, like, during the day spoke to me, was like, put your house on the market. You're not even going to have to put a sign up. And I was like, oh my word. Okay, God. And then you came home that same evening and said, I feel like we're supposed to sell our house. And it was just like the spiritual intimacy of being on the same page spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord spoke to us. And literally, we had someone come to our door within a week of the Lord speaking that to us.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, would you be interested in selling your house? Like, and I'm like, Lord, you are so amazing.
Yeah.
You spoke to both of us, and we can say that throughout different scenarios
Yeah.
that we have had in our
Yeah,
journey where the
totally.
Lord has spoken to you and then he has spoken to me, and we're like, and it's go time.
Yeah.
And
That's so
so
good.
the spiritual intimacy keeps you on the same page, and the Lord actually begins to download, and you're like, yeah, he gave that to me too. Let's go. Let's move forward. Let's be obedient to what he's putting in our hearts to do.
Yeah.
And so it is, to me, that is a really strong foundation to build on.
Yeah.
And if it's something that you don't have in your life, it can easily be done.
Yeah.
And you start with prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're going to, pray 2 minutes. I pray 2 minutes. Let's pray for our family. It's little, it's simple. But it's walking towards each other to become more spiritually intimate.
Yeah. Yeah. So you begin to practice it. And if it's very awkward and uncomfortable, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Most things are when you first start them.
Yeah.
And so for men, learning to actually pray out loud, learning to pray in front of other people,
Mm-hmm.
man, with your wife, it's an amazing opportunity, first of all, for you to learn to pray. And
Mm-hmm.
secondly, for you to pray with your wife. And so, yeah, beginning to practice that. The other thing that as you're recounting some of the early days is I appreciate your meeting me in the middle and being patient in the process of me developing. Because as a
Mm-hmm.
husband and wife,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to grow at the same pace.
Mm-mm.
We're not always going to be on the same page
Mm-hmm.
and just grow evenly to where there's no conflict or no type of um, disparity between where we're at in our walk.
Mm-hmm.
And so your patience with me, first of all, gave me time to catch up and then to grow and then to become the man of faith that I was supposed to be. But it also let me know that you valued our relationship more than your stance on what we needed to do on Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
If you had drawn a hard line and been like, I'm going to church, and you had condemned me for not going, it would not have created an environment where we could have increased our intimacy. It would have actually further separated and disconnected us in that area. And
That's
I would
right.
have held it. I could have held it against you. You
Mhm.
could have held it against me.
Absolutely. And there's a wedge right
Yep,
there that
yep.
happens.
But
Yep.
instead, you thought that through and were like,
Mhm.
okay, well, we did go to church on Sunday morning. I'm going to compromise on this and meet him in the middle and say, okay, no, let's spend Sunday evenings together.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that approach was not a compromise where you were compromising some very foundational value in your life, but you were like, man, I'm putting the relationship in front of, ahead of
That's right.
my own desire here so that I can be with my husband and help this relationship. And I feel like it paid dividends over time for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that same grace and love and meeting each other in the middle when you walked through depression, it's like it's all these areas
Yeah.
that we actually have to come and have grace for each other and have love. It's like, First Peter talks about love covers a multitude of sins, and it wasn't like you were sinning, but love covers.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking that position of grace, and that, maybe, your husband's not where you think he needs to be, but it's grace. I had grace over you, and it was something the Lord gave me, grace and love. I couldn't do that on my own.
Right.
When you walk through deep depression and you weren't in tune with your emotions,
Yeah.
that had to come from the Lord.
Mm.
And I had to have him fill me with a compassion and a love and a grace because you were shut down. And so really, this is not something we conjure. And I'm speaking, men, women, you don't conjure up that like, I got to meet him in the middle and I've got to have that grace. No, it's grace that comes from God.
Yeah.
And it's
Wow.
asking for his help to love the other person well and to meet them in the middle, to have that grace that covers. And I remember even just there were moments where, frustration is an emotion we all can have in marriage. And I would always catch myself being like, okay, but you know what? He's having grace for me. Like I could stack some things. We can stack all these cases
Yeah.
up against our spouse and build a huge case, and that brings division and not emotional connection.
Right.
But I had to go, no, like he actually has grace for me, and I'm going to have grace for him, and I'm going to love him the way Jesus would love me, because Jesus has given me grace.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
and so I just think there is that reminder that it's so easy to get caught up in the stacking cases against each other. And I remember there was a moment in our marriage where we hit that 7-year mark, and that was actually our toughest year in marriage, to where it was like, I don't even know if we like each other right now.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we were really emotionally
Yeah.
disconnected.
Yeah.
So
But we had 2 kids. We had a lot of stuff going on outside of our marriage with work. The business was tough.
ministry
We
was
were
like,
running with trying to work for the church, work at the church that we were helping out. It was a
absolutely.
crazy time. But yeah, you get to that point where you stand back and you're like, yeah, what are
What
we
are we
doing here?
right? And I realized I was actually in our house, and I was listening to a Focus on the Family broadcast, and they were talking about how walls can be built in your heart,
Mm,
or as I was saying, those cases can be built, and it's the walls that actually keep us from intimacy with our spouse.
wow.
And I remember, they begin to just lead people through a prayer of forgiveness. You need to actually forgive your spouse. You need to release those things that you've held against them,
Mm,
or judgments, and you actually need to forgive. And I remember I had felt like I have walls. I
mm,
have walls in my heart. And I remember just like coming and falling on my knees and saying, Jesus, I forgive him. I've built cases against John.
mm.
Um, and I forgive him. And literally that wall, I just remember, crying, and the wall came down,
Wow.
and my heart opened, because really our heart gets closed off to each other.
Yeah.
And my heart opened, and I realized, and I was able to see you in a different light, because I didn't have the lens of unforgiveness on. I
Right.
didn't have the lens of these cases I'd been holding against you, that you haven't met these needs of mine, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I was able to love you, and there was a shift that happened in our marriage.
Yeah.
And what it takes is actually just a moment where our heart gets right, and it shifts a perspective,
Yeah.
and we can see clearly, and we can see our spouse clearly, and we see through the eyes of grace and love.
Yeah.
And so I was so thankful for that moment, because there was a shift that happened in our marriage.
Right.
And then, we carried on, and then, there's a different point when you can have different moments where you come to the place, okay, I release forgiveness and judgment. And so that
Yeah.
perspective change
Yeah.
was crucial.
Because you don't always have time to process everything that happens in the moment. And sometimes things get kind of swept under the rug in the busyness of life, of
Absolutely.
raising kids, of doing everything that's required in that early season. And so it's not uncommon for those types of walls to get built up, and you're not even building them up on purpose
Oh,
or
no.
intentionally.
Unaware.
It's just they're there. They just get built up, and then you come to a point where you're like, well, why do I feel the way I feel about my
Yep.
spouse? Why are we treating each other this way? This isn't what we intended originally. And you have, at that point, when you become aware, that's when you go to that place of what's going on here, and you begin to get in touch with, okay, what am I holding against my spouse?
That's right.
What do I need to forgive?
That's right.
What do I need to talk to them about? What do I need to release? When you talk about judgment, that means that I'm essentially labeling you as guilty in a certain area because of what you did against me. And when I label you as guilty, I am judging you in a way to where it creates a wall that I look at you through.
That's right.
And it's not a free we're not free in our relationship. We're not connected in intimacy. Rather, we're trying to come against these walls that we've built up that completely impact the way we see each other, the way we feel about each other, and the way we treat each other.
That's right.
And so really allowing forgiveness, taking the time to forgive each other, taking the time to communicate, taking the time to humble yourself and say, I'm sorry.
That's right.
It's amazing how quickly those walls get built up.
That's
But
right.
it's also amazing when, like you're talking about, when you give those things to the Lord and you forgive, the healing that takes place and the freedom that comes from that. And you talk about just immediately, like, it's like taking a backpack off after you've been hiking up in the mountains for a few miles and you take off a 50-pound backpack, you feel like you could float.
That's
It's
right.
that same type of feeling when you actually break those walls down and you realize, oh my goodness, we are free now to continue to grow together in our relationship.
That's right.
Beautiful thing. It's so important to take the time to do in that context of being young, like relatively young marrieds, like 7 year, that 7 year mark.
Right.
It's so common to see couples who you can tell that they're married and they're getting through it, but yet there's not a real deep connection there. They're just kind of going through the motions and just trying to survive. And what we would say to you is take the time, to talk, to pray and say, God, would you show me where I've built these walls up?
That's right.
Would you help me to forgive the things that have been done against me? And would you give me the humility to go and ask for forgiveness for the things that I've done? And you guys taking the time to do that in your marriage will see so much life come to your marriage. You'll let the light into your that relationship, and the healing power of God will come in, and it's incredible what that does. And it really does. Again, it allows the intimacy in all of these different areas just to kind of level up.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful.
I love that. You mentioned just that, asking for forgiveness and bringing yourself to that place of humility and that posture of humility that says, I own what I've done.
Yeah.
And that is, again, I know I mentioned that earlier in the broadcast, but you're modeling that not only in your marriage, but in your relationships with your children.
That's really true.
And there's been many times I've heard like, oh, my parents never modeled forgiveness in our household. It was brushed under the carpet. No one ever owned. And so then, you have the blow up and then everything's fine. And so there's this element of like, if you develop it in your marriage, it will be an overflow to how you deal with your children, and that you'll take that same posture, not pride, but of humility that says, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I did this, this, and this, will you forgive me?
Right.
It's just forgiveness is a key. It is. So I'm so glad you brought that up as well.
It's so important. And every one of these areas that we're talking about and every one of the implementations that you can put into place to help grow in these areas of intimacy requires you to take time. To take the time.
That's right.
To take the time to build the emotional connection, the physical connection, the spiritual connection, these different areas. And oftentimes we put our marriage at the very back of the line.
Yep.
And we put everything in front of our marriage. And that's why our marriage suffers.
That's
because
right.
Every sporting event that our kids has, all of their school activities, every church event, every family gathering, every business meeting, all of these things end up taking all of our time and effort. And when we're done, our spouse gets what's left over. And often it's not much.
That's right.
And so beginning to change your mindset on that, and you've got to carve time out.
Yes.
If you don't carve time out to address these areas and to do the things we're talking about, then it's kind of like you get all excited about having a garden in your backyard, and you go and you get the soil ready, and then you plant the seeds, and then you're super excited, but then it's like you get busy and you never water it. You never
Right.
weed it,
Right.
and you never take care of it. And the next thing you know, your garden's a disaster
That's
because
right.
you never cared for it.
That's
And it
right.
didn't produce nearly the fruit that it could have. And so we want our marriages to be fruitful. We want our families to grow and to thrive. And it takes time and it takes care
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like maintenance, but it's so important. And you
Yep.
discover this with time because you see the impact of not doing it and you realize, wow, I'm so grateful that we were able to make the adjustments when we did, because otherwise it could have been a train wreck.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to actually look back on 32 years and go, wow, like, thank you, God, that we took the time and that we can be honest about the rough patches,
Yeah.
but we turned to you. We made adjustments,
Yeah.
but you were always first. Build your life upon the rock.
Yeah.
In Jesus, you were the rock.
Yeah.
And we always came back to that place of our lives being built and our marriage being built on Jesus.
Yeah. It's so good.
And so, 32 years in, it's worth it.
Yes.
It's worth it to take the time. And if there are obstacles or things that seem so like, I don't know how we're going to work our way through it, like it's possible and there's hope.
Yes. That's so good. Thank you, God, for that, because, we, like you said, we've been through some really tough times. And so if we can do it and God can get us through it, he can get anyone through it, which is great. And
That's right.
And so we want there to be hope in this.
That's right.
And that people would understand that the implementation is relatively simple. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of you doing it.
That's right. That's right. I know, it reminds me of, there's moments too that you go through those ups and downs in marriage. But I remember particularly like year 20 when we just kind of had, ministry that didn't work out. We were kind of going through just kind of a phase, and I was having a really hard time. And you took me to Hawaii and said, I'm going to invest in my marriage because my wife needs it. So you were aware. And we celebrated our 20th in Hawaii. But what was really special to me is that you pursued me. And like you were saying in the beginning, it's easy to pursue in the beginning and you conquer that. You get the wife, but you actually knew, like, I better pursue the heart of my wife right now. And we landed in Hawaii, and every day you had planned out a special gift and a note that I got to open every single day. And I was floored. But that filled me so much as your wife that you cared deeply enough. And you got gifts that were like, oh my gosh, this is so special. I felt so loved. So there's moments as men to pursue your wife's heart.
Yeah.
Pursue her, take her out, date her, because she needs you to continue to pursue her.
Yes.
For that emotional connection.
Yeah. That was definitely one of those forks in the road for me in our marriage, where I saw something in you that I'd never seen before. And it was like, oh my gosh, she is not in a good place.
That's right.
And it was not your fault. It was more of the aftermath of some of the decisions that we had made together.
That's right.
That were very difficult times for us.
Yes.
But I saw that it was very, very hard on you at an emotional level, and you were about as emotionally broken as I've ever seen you.
Yes.
And so that was like, let's go. You've got to step it up. You can't just do business as usual.
That's right.
You've got to fight for your marriage. You've got to actually invest and make this turnaround happen. And it wasn't hard, and it wasn't overly. I mean, it was like it was the right thing to do at the right time. And so I love looking back on that trip because it was pivotal.
Yes, I agree.
I can't believe that it was that long ago already.
I know, right?
But it was good, and it was so important, and I'm so glad that it brought life to you, and that it spoke to you into all the way into who you are as a woman, but as my wife and our relationship. And it really did set the tone for us moving forward to grow and to really handle some other challenges that we had to face even after that.
That's
But we
right.
handled it from a place of health and intimacy
That's
rather than a
right.
place of brokenness and disconnectedness.
That's right.
So now moving forward, we got number 5 is recreational intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability to have fun together and enjoy doing things together is really
Mhm.
important.
That's right.
And, we aren't necessarily wired the same. Like
No.
for me, like what I would love to do is head out into the woods and go backpacking and camping and,
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy the wilderness. And that's, for me, that's like, oh, that fills my cup.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we've discovered early on our first camping trip ever with another great couple that we love. Me and my buddy Scott decided we're going to take our new wives on a camping trip. And we decided we're going to head up into the Mount Hood National Forest and we're going to take the wives out. We're going to take them up to a lake. They're going to lay out in the sun. We're going to fish. And it was like, yeah. Well, not only did we have to haul way too much stuff all the way up to this mountain lake in the middle of nowhere, which was a shocker to us. We're used to going really light, and all of a sudden we're hauling all this stuff,
all the meals.
Yeah, and then we get up there, and it wasn't as nice as we had hoped, and the ladies were not impressed, and I feel like that trip may have caused you to be like, I don't think I ever want to do that again. And so from the get-go, we had a little bit of a challenge. There was other things that we enjoyed doing together, but like the summer fun stuff, it was like, okay, well, we're going to have to figure out this whole recreational intimacy thing, which
That's right.
I feel like we ended up doing a pretty good job on. But what are some ways that couples can build recreational intimacy?
Well, I think it's that, we talked about meeting each other in the middle because, everyone's idea of going on vacation and doing things together, or it could be from the small things, whether you go and I started working out at the gym a couple days a week with you. And so that was something we could do recreational. And that's actually been a really fun thing.
Right.
We'll get up early and
we'll curse the comfort of the pillow.
That's right.
Get after it.
So that's been fun to do. So there's the little things and there's the big things that you can do recreational. But I think it's being willing to do some of those things that discover new things.
Yeah.
And being willing to try new things.
Right.
And but as far as the big things, the big trips that you want to take, you might not be on the same page of where you want to go. Someone likes the beach, someone wants the mountains.
Right.
And so
I feel like this is an area where I did a bit of compromising because we would take the family camping in the summers, and it was not camping like what I wanted to do for camping.
No, and I mean, it was mine because I'm like, oh my gosh, we're at a campground.
Yes.
There's bathrooms. Oh, listen to everyone. There's people rollerblading and riding bikes, and the families listen to the kids. And I'm like, oh, this is my idea of camping. And you're like, wow, this is not camping.
Yeah.
I'm used to seeing the stars in the quiet. And so, yes, we had to compromise on that, right?
But it was great.
And,
I mean, it wasn't like I was suffering, but I was definitely not my cup of tea. But even with that, though, it was like we built memories and we built time together in doing something that we both could enjoy. But it was definitely a compromise.
Absolutely, and everyone is happy because then but being willing to bend and compromise is the key.
That's right.
But also discovering new things together.
Yes.
And so I know that we've gotten to travel a lot together, and that's been a lot of fun to do that together.
Right.
So that's been new for us, having children on the East Coast. It's been fun too.
Our older two live in Florida. And so as we've gotten older, we've been developing this even out more and more as we've learned to travel together and have fun and do different things recreationally. It's been great.
That's right.
It's another area where it's like, hey, what are the areas where you can come together and enjoy a bike ride, a hike, go bowling. I've just go play pool. I don't know, whatever it is,
right.
or maybe it's like having your dogs and running your dogs and walking them, but just find areas where it's like the two of you guys can connect at a fun, playful level. because it's
Yes.
super, super important.
And I remember we did this. We've done this a few times as we actually decided to cook together.
Yeah.
And that actually was really fun. Again, we kind of discovered that, oh, we enjoy cooking. So let's, you
Yeah.
plan the meal and we'll cook it together and
Yeah.
actually turn on music that matches the meal we're going to
That's
be
right.
having. So yeah, just having fun and being playful. And that's one thing, is like not taking ourselves too seriously,
Hmm.
laughing together over these recreational things we do.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I feel like that something else that comes to mind is the fact that we began to invest into a athletic club membership
oh,
as a
right.
family, right? And so that
Mhm.
was great because it gave us a place to go on family nights when we had family nights on Friday nights.
Mhm.
It gave us a place to go together to where we could
Mhm.
play and be in the pool or play in the
Mhm.
gym. And so there was that recreational element, but we invested into it. They were not cheap memberships, but they were also points where, man, our family needed that time, that
Yep.
recreational time, and you and I needed it. And so being willing to invest into it, understanding that the connection that's made is well worth it.
That's
If
right.
you're able to afford some type of a club membership. This was not just like like where we go now is just a place where you can go lift and do fitness.
Mhm.
These clubs were a place where they had an indoor outdoor pool. They had a hot tub. They had like basketball courts, racquetball courts, tennis courts. It was a very nice. There was a
Family
couple, yeah,
friendly.
and that's where we would go. And
Mhm.
so rather than go out to restaurants or whatever on Friday nights for family night, we'd go to the club, and it
That's
was an
right.
investment. But we connected recreationally through that, and it
Mhm.
was a ton of fun.
That's
I
right.
loved those times.
And I think too, it's keeping the perspective, whether it's something really small or like a big trip.
Yeah,
It's the little ways that you do connect.
yeah,
I remember taking our kids to the pet store because it's like
yeah,
keeping it cheap,
yeah, yeah.
and that was like a highlight for them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was the time our son decided that he was actually
He's gonna fish for goldfish.
yes, yeah, but he came running in the store, "Dad, Dad!" And his whole arm is like sopping wet, and we're like, "What did the kid get into?" And he takes you over there to the fish tank, and
Right.
he's like digging for fish, and I'm like, "Okay, I think we need to go now."
Oh
But
yeah,
but I think it's
yeah,
just getting back to whether it's your as a couple, it's the small things,
yeah.
and making sure you make time for those, and actually what you value, you're going to put effort into it.
Right.
So value those things.
Yes. Have fun together.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's game night, play. What
Mm-hmm.
games do you like to do? Sitting down for a game of Yahtzee or
Mm-hmm.
what's that word game you like to play?
Scrabble. Oh no,
Scrabble,
you
but
always dominate in
yeah, well,
Scrabble.
I
Oh
dominate pretty much all
no, it's
games.
true. It is
But
true.
there's the other one, Boggle. Boggle's the one
Oh
that
no, I can get you at
yeah,
Boggle.
you do those. That's a tough one. But yeah, so recreational intimacy is really important. And then we're going to wrap it up with my favorite area of of intimacy, and that would be sexual intimacy. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really sad to hear how many men and women in their marriage have 0
Mm-hmm.
sexual intimacy,
Yeah.
and it's tough because the way that the world portrays sex and the
Mm-hmm.
way that we go into a sexual relationship as being just this physical relationship
Mm-hmm.
to where we find pleasure in it
Mm-hmm.
without all of these other levels of intimacy that we've talked about, these other areas of intimacy. The sexual intimacy is very difficult to build. If you're not emotionally connected,
That's right.
it's impossible to build sexual intimacy.
That's right.
If you're not physically touching
That's right.
and physically connected, the sexual intimacy is impossible to really connect there as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
sexual intimacy is an amazing opportunity and a gift from God
That's
for
right.
us in our marriage, in which we can really go deeper in our connection with each other and
Mm-hmm.
have an area that we enjoy and that we only enjoy ourselves.
That's right.
And it creates such a bond and such a place of connection
Mm-hmm.
that is so important. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you're out there and you're like, man, we have terrible sexual intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
I am so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you one thing is that you can you can establish and restore an emotional intimacy in your relationship as you work on all these areas together.
Yes, that's right.
And so the sexual intimacy is this point where a man and his wife come together at a sexual level and enjoy sex together and the different expressions of sex that there are, and where there's no shame in it, but there's enjoyment and there's the ability to understand that, man, I wish people would understand the fact that being monogamous, a monogamous relationship and sex with a one person
Yep.
for 30 plus years can be amazing and get better and better and better.
Amen.
And so I want to put that out there just so that people have this hope that man, it's so much better having this deep connection with each other year after year after year, and things do get better and better and better.
That's right.
But it starts with understanding that sex is much more than just a physical release. And I remember when we were first married, enjoying the sex, obviously, but really not understanding what it took to actually develop sexual intimacy and understanding that sex was a lot more than just impressing my wife with my sexual prowess. The intimacy was a lot more involved than just this physical act.
That's right.
And so if you didn't grow up in a home where your parents loved each other, or if this wasn't modeled for you and all you've had is Hollywood's idea of sex, or all you've had is kind of a world's perspective on what a sexual relationship looks like, then what you find lots of times is men and women who are pursuing sex because they want to fulfill their own sexual desire. And so sex becomes about me, my pleasure, my desire. And so I'm going to fulfill that pleasure and desire by having sex with you. But rather than it being something to where I am giving you myself in in this sexual act, I'm actually trying to take from you for my own personal pleasure. And, the Bible talks about how, like, the woman's body doesn't belong to herself, it belongs to her husband. And the same thing is true for the husband, where the husband's body doesn't belong to himself, but it belongs to the wife. And the idea is that we are trying to bless each other in this exchange that actually allows the sexual pleasure and the sexual intimacy to increase with time as we give each other more and more of ourselves. And so there's this dynamic where it's like the kingdom of God is, it's the upside down
That's
kingdom.
right. That's right.
And where, Jesus says, hey, if you want to really find your life, you've got to lose it. Well, it's the same thing with sexual intimacy, is that I will be sexually fulfilled more and more the more I give to you of myself. The more I try to love you and please you and to work in these other areas of connection and intimacy, it increases the fulfillment and the closeness and the connection that you and I have sexually.
That's right. It's like the icing on the cake.
Yeah, actually, yeah. But when that's broken and a woman doesn't feel beautiful or loved, or like the man is trying to please her or reach her, then it becomes something to where she almost begins to despise the man.
Absolutely.
And the man can feel rejected if his wife doesn't want to have sex with him. And so this can become such a difficult area in marriage. And looking at that, understanding the way that men are wired and that women are wired and that we're wired differently, what are some things that a man could do to begin to help build sexual intimacy into his relationship with his wife from a wife's perspective?
I think a woman wants to feel safe, cared for, connected to. And so if you can go after, like you said, those other areas, the sexual intimacy will be the icing on the cake.
Good.
It will be the one thing that, like, it is supposed to be pleasurable and add to your life. But so many people, it isn't. And so for a woman, though, she wants to be pursued still.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to feel beautiful. She wants to have those words of affirmation, with the many seasons of life of having children, being pregnant, and like the value that's on her. And so I think that a man can continue to walk in those ways to gain the heart of his wife.
Yes.
The aim should be, I want to pursue the heart of my wife and have her feel safe, valued, and secure.
Yes. That's so good. And if you're out there and you're pursuing your wife with lust in your heart,
Mm-hmm.
it's different than pursuing your wife with love in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And many men don't know how to experience sex outside of lust.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I've objectified my wife's body and our
Mhm.
sexual experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to begin to love your wife and not, if you love, like you're saying, if you love your wife and you build these other areas of intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
it will open the door for the sexual intimacy to grow and to actually begin to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But love says, I'm willing to be patient in the process and let my wife grow and come along in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that period of time, I'm going to be patient in the process, and I'm just going to work on loving my wife,
Mm-hmm.
speaking life into her, speaking
Mhm.
beauty into her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to push her to kind of just fulfill my needs sexually in a lustful way, but rather I'm going to love her. I'm going to pursue her. I'm going to pursue physical intimacy before I pursue sexual intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pursue emotional intimacy before I pursue sexual intimacy.
Yeah.
And like when I was a young adult or young married, I had a guy say, sex starts in the morning. And I was like, how does that work? And it was
Mhm.
like, the way you treat your wife from the start of the day
Yep.
impacts the way that she responds to you when you guys are wanting to have sex at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so building this life of intimacy in all of these different areas is crucial.
That's right.
For a fulfilling, healthy, vibrant sex life.
That's right.
And that's what we really want for couples is we want you to be able to say, oh, how are we doing sexually? We're doing fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the result of you guys having intimacy and where you're building in all of these 6 areas.
That's right. And I think there is an element that in that sexual intimacy, if that is not happening, it's easy for a man, and maybe you can speak to this more, a man to go, oh, I'm not being sexually fulfilled, so this gives me license to just get my needs met from
Yeah.
porn and from other sources.
Yes.
And then the wife shuts down and goes, he doesn't pursue me anymore. He doesn't value me anymore. And so it becomes a big divide and it's a vicious cycle.
Yes.
And then, then if the wife finds out, then she's crushed and feels rejected that he went and was looking at porn and he doesn't value me. And so it's this, which has to be mended.
Yes.
And things have to be brought to the light to restore sexual intimacy, and it can be restored.
It can be. Yes. And intimacy involves closeness, which means openness, bringing things to the light, not hiding, not disconnecting.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're exactly right. Men will be caught up in the lust of their flesh, looking at porn and finding ways to pleasure themselves outside of the marriage bed. And in that place, they will be giving away what should be for their wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're struggling with lust, that's going to be a way that the enemy will use to sabotage your sexual intimacy. And so working your way through that, that's a whole nother topic of really dealing with how does a man in marriage overcome lust and really develop that kind of intimacy with his wife. It's a process. It takes time. It takes healing. It takes forgiveness. It's very much a whole. I think that's a whole topic in and of itself. But the ability, though, to understand that there is a way for you to come to a place where you and your wife have a sexual relationship that is deep and connected, enjoyable, fulfilling, satisfying. And your wife she is beautiful. And she can feel beautiful. You can be satisfied. I mean, it's just like, man, that you've got to build that way. And in all of these areas, if you think that you can just kind of ignore them and just kind of, go with the flow and not live intentionally, then you're going to lose intimacy. Intimacy requires attention, time, intentionality. And so we want to encourage all the men who are listening out there that these 6 areas are incredible building blocks to a fulfilling, satisfying marriage. And we want you to experience marriage for all that God has for you. And it's not an easy road. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And you're going to go through hard times and good times. You're going to go through the challenges, but keep at it. Don't give up, but keep working towards, okay, how can I become more emotional, intimate with my wife? How can I connect with my wife physically more effectively? How can we have financial connection and intimacy? How are we growing in our faith together and building spiritual intimacy into our marriage? Recreationally, what are we doing to have fun, to enjoy our time with each other? And then sexually, the icing on the cake, how can we grow in the bedroom as well in our sexual relationship? There's tremendous hope in this. And so there's obviously a lot more that we could talk about on these subjects, but we wanted to give you a general overview of these areas of intimacy and how you can begin to foster those areas with your wives in such a way to where you're getting closer and you're growing in your intimacy and your marriage is beginning to grow, and you will begin to see momentum in this as you apply yourself to it. And so there's lots of great resources out there as far as like books to read and courses you can take. And so, if you've got any questions or would like to hear about any of those resources, hit us up in the comments. We'll be happy to help you with some of those. We'll be doing more discussions like this again as well on the podcast. I'm sure I'll have my lovely wife, Brenda, back on here with me. It's so good having you.
Well, thank you. It's been just an honor to do this together.
Yeah.
And I'm super thankful for you, Mr. Harvey.
Yeah.
And I can say that 32 years, we've had a lot of adventure.
Yeah.
God's been faithful. And I'm super grateful that you've loved me well, and that it's like a fine wine, 32 years.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
it continues to get better. There's truth to that.
Yeah.
It gets better and better.
That's right. It's so good. You're not supposed to like make me tear up here, sweetie.
Sorry.
No, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
I honor you. And I always think so highly of you, and I'm so grateful for you. So glad to have you with me here on this episode. You're way better looking than Will.
Sorry, Will, you're out of a job. No, I'm kidding.
But, for our listeners out there, we are certainly grateful to have you here with us. Again, if you want any more resources in any areas, we've got lots of resources that we can provide and would love to connect with you. So drop a comment in the comments or hit us up on social media. or hit us up on our website, mobilizeman.com, where you can sign up for our weekly Waypoints newsletter that we send out every Friday morning at 5 a.m. Just more building blocks that can help you in your life and leadership. And as well, we've got our Trek Northwest trips coming up starting in June, which you can go to our website on the events page. And we'd love to have you. It's a 3-day wilderness adventure. Brenda won't be going on those with us.
No, I'll be praying for you guys.
But it's a great time. We head up into the Mount Hood Wilderness, and we get a Friday, Saturday, and then half a day on Sunday up in the wilderness. And it's just a tremendous time connecting, and it's very transformational. So if you want to get out for a couple days and enjoy the wilderness, you can sign up on our events page for that. And but until next week, man, God bless you guys, and stay on the path.
Bye-bye.